I am Dr. Ray Dykes, and this is the Personal Faith Program. This is a series of podcasts on personal faith with a passion, how to know what you really believe. This is a section on New Straw, on religious information, the most controversial issues of Christianity, to give you an idea and an opportunity to choose what it is you believe based on your experience. This podcast is on Jesus. Are there problems with Jesus as divine Son of God? Is what we're talking about. Are there problems with Jesus as divine Son of God? Jesus of Nazareth is the problem of Christianity. Now let that sink in for a minute. Jesus is the problem of Christianity. Jesus is not the problem of Judaism. He's not the problem of Buddhism or Islam or Taoism or Confucianism or Hinduism. He's the problem of Christianity. The reason I say that is that Jesus has always been the philosophical and theological problem of Christianity, especially the views of his humanity and divinity. The history of the divine Jesus can be traced back to Persia and Zoroastrianism and the person of Mithras, a divine human figure sent down to earth by the good God to aid in the fight against the bad God. This concept of the divine Savior sent down to earth in human form was picked up by Greek Gnosticism, whose thought world was dominant in the Roman Empire in the first century of the Common Era, CE, same as AD. Christianity started as a sect of Judaism, and Jesus was the problem, but also the originator. Problem doesn't mean bad. Problem means something you have to work on, something you have to think about. The earliest Christian writers, from Paul to Augustine, struggled with the nature of Jesus and his relationship with God. Some wrote that Jesus was not created by God, but coexisted with God before the creation of the universe. Others wrote that Jesus was God squeezed into a human form, and in that form, God suffered with and for humankind. Another significant group of Christians, called the Docetics, taught that Jesus, being totally human, totally divine, never experienced human birth. He just showed up one day in Galilee, having snatched a human body off the rack. He only appeared to die on the cross, since no God ever dies. Not many of these people agreed on who Jesus was or is or what Jesus did. The people of the first century thought in Greek Gnostic thought forms. Now we're going to explain that a little shortly. Therefore, most of the New Testament was written in those Greek Gnostic thought forms. Jesus had to be presented as divine to compete with the other gods present in the Roman Empire. To have presented him as human would have meant a crib death for Christianity. Today, most church people profess to believe in both the humanity and divinity of Jesus, but lean toward the divine Jesus. Most unchurched people today appreciate the human Jesus, but have serious difficulties, at least, with Jesus as a second God alongside God. Now, this podcast we're going to walk you through some elements of Jesus' divinity, 9 of them, including whether and why he was sent down from heaven to earth for purposes of salvation, whether he did miracles, and whether he died for the sins of humanity. Now, since this program is not intended to cover these matters in full detail, only minimal summary explanations are given related to each of these 9 questions. The goal of this podcast is to help you face what you do and do not believe about Jesus, the central figure of Christianity. The first question about Jesus is when his existence began. Some early Christians believed and some didn't believe that Jesus existed with God before the creation of the world. They got into big fights over that statement because some people said Jesus didn't exist with God before the creation of the world because God created Jesus. But those who believe that Jesus is co-eternal with God say, no, 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 you can't do that. If Jesus is divine, Jesus had to exist with God before the creation of the world. Therefore, what we have in the very beginning of the Gospel of John is called the Gnostic hymn. It says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Now, that's to say, Jesus existed with God from the beginning, before the creation of the world, was not a part of creation, was not created by God. Those who believed that Jesus was divine said he can't be a creature. Anything that's created is a creature, and creatures aren't divine. And so the battle raged. In fact, there were those in the early Christian church who said that God stood at the center of creation and Jesus was God's right hand, or logos. Logos is the Greek word meaning word. It means more than that, actually. Logos also means mind, will, brain, and or identity. It's really a comprehensive word in Greek. They used it in a variety of ways with a multitude of meanings. Now, a second point of debate, number 2, is that Jesus was sent down by God from heaven to earth to be the Savior of the world. Those who focus on the divine side are big on this understanding. These thought forms have a blended history. Until 500 BCE, same as BC, the major world religions were about the number 1. The important number was 1. Even in Hinduism, the big number was 1, even though there are millions of gods in Hinduism. Those millions of gods, by the way, can be seen as manifestations of one God. You had oneness in Buddhism, in Taoism, in Confucianism. Each human being is whole and not divided into 2 or 3 parts like mind, body, and soul. The universe is one and not divided into heaven and earth. But in an ancient Hebrew thought and the religion which came to be known as Judaism, which also began around 500 BCE, the number is 1. There's one God. In Deuteronomy 6:4 it says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one." So the early Jewish Christians believed in one God in Jerusalem, but not the Roman Christians. Rome had many gods with power over different areas of life. And there was no way that a human being, particularly a Jew from a backwater province like Galilee, was going to compete with those gods in Rome unless that Palestinian Jew was also a very powerful god. However, in Persian Zoroastrianism, which started around 550 BCE, there were 2 gods. Angra Mainyu was the bad god and Ahura Mazda was the good god. They were almost equal, but Ahura Mazda had a little bit of an edge. They and their armies were in a constant cosmic battle. Ahura Mazda created the earth and its people as a trap for Angra Mainyu, the bad god. This battle between the good god and the bad god provided the need for a savior figure for human beings. So Ahura Mazda sent one of his 6 holy immortals, Mithras, down to earth to teach human beings how to live moral, noble lives. And by doing so, help defeat the god of immorality, Angra Mainyu. Mithraism became a sub-religion of Zoroastrianism, particularly in the Roman army. Mithraism became Christianity's chief competitor in the first 200 years of Christianity. Roman soldiers became infatuated with the idea of this divine human figure who led them in battle, symbolically speaking. By the way, eventually Christians were able to convince these Roman soldiers that Jesus was Mithras. The concept of the divine human savior figure also arose in Gnosticism. In Gnosticism, the divine figure was sent down from the pleroma, where all the gods lived. He was sent down in human form to teach secret words, magic words, to human beings who needed them when they died in order to get into heaven. In Gnostic thought, humans were created with an innate divine spark, which was imprisoned in the body during one's life. Since the body, or flesh, was regarded as a stinking prison for the divine spark, or soul, the soul longed to be free from the garbage heap of a body. The only way to be free was to learn the magic words taught by the divine human figure, and the enlightened soul of the dead human could recite these passwords to get through the gates of the seven heavens and eventually allow a return to the pleroma, or ultimate heaven. On the other hand, Hebrew prophetic literature endorsed the concept of a Messiah to be raised up from among the common people as the Savior of the people. This thoroughly human being would be chosen by God and anointed to accomplish a special purpose in God's will. In fact, the literature contains the stories of several messiahs, from Kings Saul and David to the Persian king Cyrus the Great, a Gentile Messiah. Nowhere in the Old Testament is there a concept of a God being sent down from heaven to save the people. Rather, the Messiah, the human Messiah, exerts responsibility on God's behalf. In human thinking, this responsibility always involved issues of social justice and reform with spiritual and ethical implications. At the time of Jesus, the Jewish people were hoping for the arrival of a new Messiah who would gather and command a huge army and drive the occupying Romans out of Palestine. Such a leader was to arrive in Jerusalem, riding on a donkey. This king would not be a son of God, but would be a son of Adam, or son of man. He would free the people from social, religious, and political oppression, and all the people of the world would experience peace and justice. We'll continue this podcast, this idea about Jesus and as the problem of Christianity in the next podcast. See you then.